What happens when the most powerful man in the world challenges God himself? Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, was transformed into a wild creature, condemned to live like a beast without control over his destiny. But why did such a grand ruler suffer such an extreme punishment? And what does this story teach us about pride and humility? Get ready, because today we are going to unveil the secrets behind Nebuchadnezzar's divine punishment. Nebuchadnezzar was one of the most powerful and influential kings of antiquity, famous for his military dominance and the splendor he brought to the Babylonian Empire. At its peak, Babylon was one of the greatest centers of culture, science, and power. Nebuchadnezzar's reign is remembered both for his military conquests, such as the invasion and destruction of Jerusalem, and for his architectural achievements, like the construction of the Hanging Gardens, considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. All this consolidated him as a legendary figure, practically untouchable in the eyes of his people and his adversaries. Over the years and the expansion of his empire, Nebuchadnezzar began to see himself as a figure above other mortals, someone who answered to no one but himself. The opulence of his court and the respect, or fear, he inspired in his subjects made him believe that his power was absolute and his authority unquestionable. To Nebuchadnezzar, the splendor of Babylon was not a reflection of divine blessing or will but of his own greatness and ability. This excessive pride led him to believe that he was beyond the need for any teaching or humility, as if his own destiny were entirely in his hands. With this, Nebuchadnezzar began to ignore the values of compassion and justice that a king should demonstrate to his people. Instead of ruling with a sense of responsibility, he ruled with the arrogance of someone who considers himself unassailable. This is a lesson that echoes beyond his time, showing how power and success can easily blind someone to the reality that everyone, without exception, is subject to something greater. Thus, the story of Nebuchadnezzar is a warning that transcends the centuries. Excessive pride and the desire for absolute control are the first steps toward a fall. No ruler, no matter how strong, can be greater than the forces that govern the world. His trajectory, which led him to challenge divine power itself, is a clear example that even the most powerful can suffer the consequences of their actions. And this is just the introduction to the divine punishment that would change Nebuchadnezzar's destiny. On a night that seemed ordinary, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that left him restless and fearful. He saw a gigantic, imposing tree with deep roots, growing magnificently and touching the sky, visible throughout the world. The tree had vibrant leaves, and its abundant branches provided shelter and shade to animals, while its fruits served as food for all. This vision seemed a reflection of the grandeur of his empire and the reach of his power. For Nebuchadnezzar, the image of the tree must have reinforced the idea that he was the center and sustainer of his entire nation. However, this majestic vision soon took a dark turn. Suddenly, a voice from heaven ordered that the tree be cut down. Its branches were to be stripped, its leaves scattered, and its fruits destroyed, leaving only the stump and roots bound with iron and bronze chains. This scene of destruction and abandonment shocked the king, deeply contrasting with the image of glory he had initially witnessed. What had begun as a symbol of power became a portent of downfall and humiliation. Nebuchadnezzar awoke frightened, realizing that this vision was not just any dream but a message he did not understand. Disturbed by the vision, Nebuchadnezzar summoned all the wise men, magicians, and diviners of his kingdom to interpret the dream, but none could decipher the enigma. They were perplexed and fearful, perhaps intuiting the weight of that message. Then the king remembered Daniel, the Jewish prophet who had previously interpreted other difficult dreams and always showed a special connection with the divine. Daniel was known for his wisdom and humility, qualities that contrasted with the arrogance of many others in Nebuchadnezzar's court. When Daniel heard the dream, he remained silent, clearly shaken. His expression revealed the seriousness of the message he was about to deliver. He knew that the tree symbolized Nebuchadnezzar himself, his power, and the greatness of his empire. In explaining the vision to the king, Daniel revealed that the order to cut down the tree was a clear warning that the king would be stripped of his power and experience a radical fall. The vision meant that Nebuchadnezzar would undergo unprecedented humiliation, removed from his position and reduced to the condition of a being devoid of reason. Daniel also advised the king to seek humility and justice, to abandon pride, and to recognize that his power came from a higher force. He suggested that if the king repented, perhaps the punishment could be avoided. However, the warning was ignored by Nebuchadnezzar, who, in his vanity, believed that nothing and no one could shake his greatness. Thus, Daniel's prophecy, which could have been a warning for transformation, became a certain condemnation, sealing the king's fate. Daniel was a prominent figure in Nebuchadnezzar's court, not for titles or riches but for his unquestionable wisdom and integrity. Having been brought as a prisoner to Babylon along with others of his people, Daniel quickly gained the king's trust thanks to his gifts of interpretation and his connection with the divine. His position in the court was challenging. He had to balance his loyalty to the king with his unwavering devotion to God. And in this unique position, he became the bearer of divine messages, even when those messages contained severe warnings. In the case of the dream of the tree, Daniel not only interpreted the vision but assumed the role of spiritual counselor to the king. Knowing that the message brought devastating judgment, Daniel could have softened the interpretation to please Nebuchadnezzar or even ensure his own safety. However, faithful to his calling, he revealed the truth, warning the king about what was to come. Daniel's stance demonstrates admirable courage, as he risked his position and even his life by confronting the most powerful man of the time with such a difficult truth. In advising the king, Daniel went beyond interpreting the dream. He offered an alternative path, suggesting that Nebuchadnezzar seek humility and abandon his excessive pride. In Daniel 4 verse 27, he says, "Therefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable to you. Break off your sins by practicing righteousness, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. Perhaps there may be a lengthening of your prosperity." This statement shows Daniel's hope that the king could learn a lesson without needing to suffer such harsh consequences. Daniel was not just a counselor, he personified the message of humility that the dream brought. Unlike Nebuchadnezzar, who blindly trusted in his power and wealth, Daniel lived in simplicity and acknowledgement of the divine. He saw his gift of interpretation not as a means to exalt himself but as a sacred mission. Daniel's posture as life of faith and service contrasted with the king's self-sufficiency and constantly reminded him that there is something much greater than any earthly power. The moment of Nebuchadnezzar's fall is one of the most impactful in his story. Surrounded by the splendor of his empire and convinced of his own greatness, he continued to exalt himself, ignoring Daniel's warnings. 1 year after the dream of the tree, while admiring his palace and the grandeur of Babylon, he proudly proclaimed, "Is not this great Babylon, which I have built as a royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" Daniel 4 verse 30. It was at this moment that the prophecy was fulfilled, and Nebuchadnezzar was struck by a divine punishment that would change his life forever. Suddenly, he lost his sanity and was torn from his position as king. The man who ruled with an iron fist and saw himself as an almost divine figure began to live like an animal, feeding on grass, with his body covered in hair and his nails growing like those of birds. This extreme punishment represented more than a mere penalty. It was a complete reconfiguration of Nebuchadnezzar's human condition. He was reduced to an instinctive and primitive existence, losing all dignity and identity. This period of bestiality was not just a moment of physical humiliation but of profound spiritual transformation. Living among animals, he experienced a reality that distanced him from everything he knew and valued. He who once considered himself untouchable and invincible became a being devoid of reason, forced to confront his own insignificance in the face of creation. The pride that made him believe he was above everything and everyone now relegated him to a position of absolute impotence. Nebuchadnezzar's punishment lasted 7 years. During this time, he lived in complete vulnerability, far from any luxury or adoration. This period was necessary for him to understand the true fragility of human existence and the dependence that all, including kings, have on the divine. His life as a beast was a drastic but essential lesson for him to comprehend the limitation of human power and the greatness of the force that truly governs the world. After 7 long years living as a creature without sanity, isolated in the fields and depending on nature to survive, Nebuchadnezzar finally reached a breaking point. He, who once prided himself on his greatness, now lived debased and vulnerable, without the control or recognition he so cherished. It was only when he lifted his eyes to heaven, in an act of acknowledgement and reverence, that his mind was restored. This gesture symbolized his first act of true humility, a recognition that the power and glory he so valued did not come from him but from a higher authority. Upon regaining his sanity, Nebuchadnezzar was restored to the throne, but he was no longer the same man. The experience had profoundly transformed him. Instead of seeing himself as an absolute ruler, he now understood that his power existed to serve a greater purpose. The Bible reports that he exalted the King of Heaven, stating that all his works are true and his ways are just, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble. Daniel 4 verse 37. This confession is proof of his transformation and the respect he finally developed for divine justice. The return to the throne brought a new perspective for Nebuchadnezzar, who now led with a more humble and reverent vision. He learned that true greatness lies in the ability to recognize the source of one's authority and to use it justly. Nebuchadnezzar's story is a powerful testimony of how even the greatest leaders can learn the lesson of humility and regain a balanced and just life. This story of restoration teaches us that no matter how deep the errors, acknowledgement of the mistake and humility can pave the way for redemption. Nebuchadnezzar, one of the most powerful men of his time, rediscovered the value of humility and reverence, revealing that true wisdom comes from the awareness of our limitations and the connection with something greater. The story of Nebuchadnezzar, with his rise, fall, and redemption, is one of the most powerful accounts about humility and recognition of the divine. From being one of the proudest and most powerful men of his time, he found himself transformed, experiencing the life of a defenseless and vulnerable creature. This profound and striking experience taught the king of Babylon that no matter how much we achieve or how much power we accumulate, there is always something greater, a force that sustains and governs everything far beyond human understanding. This lesson remains alive and current. Excessive pride distances us from others and even from ourselves. When we believe we are above anyone or anything, we risk losing sight of what truly matters. Nebuchadnezzar's legacy is a warning for us to remain humble, to value what has been entrusted to us, and to remember that true greatness lies in the ability to learn and transform. If you enjoyed this content and it brought reflection, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell to continue following these biblical stories full of teachings. Also, share your ideas and experiences in the comments. Let's build a community of learning and knowledge exchange. Thank you for staying with us up to here. See you in the next video.